Join the conversation round the clock.
Only on 99.3
Nigeria Info.
Let's talk. Be part of the discussion. It's Borderline.
On 99.3 Nigeria Info.
From Washington to Beijing, Moscow to Abuja, London to Kigali, the world is shifting fast. Elections are shaping destinies, wars are redrawing borders, economies are rising and falling, and global alliances are being tested like never before. But what does it all mean for you?
With a new administration and a new president in the White House trying to put an end to the war.
I didn't know the historical context, what the state of Israel means for them.
Join the fearless Ireti Bakare-Yusuf on Borderlines every Friday at 4 p.m. on Nigeria Info 99.3. As she dissects the biggest global events and their impact on world peace.
Those who are not familiar with Israel or the war itself would not know much about the group breaking the silence.
No spin, no propaganda, just deep insights and fearless conversations on the geopolitics shaping our world.
People who will call and start telling you about the Bible prophecy about America and everything. See, America is not in the Bible.
There's some people who, yes, they share the ideology of, yes, we and these people, we are equal, but they can't speak up.
Borderlines on Nigeria Info every Friday at 4 p.m. The world is changing. Don't just watch, understand it. Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
And welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. As the promo said, no propaganda, no spin. This is Borderlines. We're going there today. Yes, somebody said Jesus is not in the, what is it? America is not in the Bible. Well, guess what? If there were going to be something about this whole world that we live in right now that would be in the Bible, it will be the United Nations. But I'm sure the Bible represents it one way or the other, which is why today it's an absolute pleasure. One of my favorite guests is already here. He's always on time. Yes, there's a lot to unpack. The UN just turned 80 officially, although, we started talking about it on Borderlines a couple of months ago. So he's going to help us to understand what just happened in the last, 8 days, I think it went on for. And we went from the sublime to the ridiculous to the, celebratory, if you like. His name is Professor Mukesh Kapila. And I'm not going to waste time because you all had lots of questions for him the last time. So I'm going to chat with him first. Listen, make sure you send your questions as early as possible to 0809-597-5805. And you will be able to call on 0201 277 0993. And if you are female, 0201 465 7190. Prof, welcome again to Borderlines. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again. Clearly you didn't have enough of me last time.
No, we didn't. We certainly, you're a straight talker. You say it exactly as it is. I mean, you told the UN exactly how you felt, and we all know what happened with that, which is why you are perfectly situated with the experience, the knowledge, and the fearlessness, if I may, to actually summarize what we've just seen last week at the UN. Like I said, from the sublime to the ridiculous to the celebratory, and even those who got their visas revoked. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, I think the ridiculous has evoked the headlines, like, for example, that poor little escalator on which I have climbed myself up and down many times, and it's a pretty harmless elevator, and teleprompters, and I've never used a teleprompter myself. So those are the ridiculous stories. But seriously, despite that, the world came together, 140 odd heads of state from 190 countries, and they did their business in the corridors, in the committee rooms, inside events, and the world got on with its business. Now, much of that may not be news, but the fact is that the UN General Assembly, this one, was a pretty successful event considering all the disturbances going on around the world on many, many topics.
I'm impressed. I was expecting you to be a lot harder on them than that, but perhaps they did do something right. Indeed, President Trump complained about the escalator, felt that the teleprompter was the weapon fashioned against him. And then we had, what's his name? Prime Minister Netanyahu. We had the Colombian Prime Minister, the President of Colombia, who was, frank and above board. My favorite, I have to say, or on my top 5 was the President of Barbados. She was totally non-negotiating. And that's where I'd like to start from, because she spoke about all the other crises that were going on in the world. She spoke about how, of course, and I remember her saying, of course, we must talk about Gaza. But here we are, we're not talking enough, or at least this UN at 80 seems to have forgotten the rest of the conflicts that are going on in the world. And as somebody who raised the alarm on Darfur, what do you make of what she said? And indeed, what a lot of...
You're cutting off here and there, so
okay.
I don't know what's happening.
Can you hear me now? Should I repeat myself? Would you like me to repeat my question?
Yeah, or summarize the question.
Is it clear
Sorry
now?
about that.
No, that's all right. The question
you're
is...
cutting on and off.
Oh, wow.
You're cutting on and off.
Okay, the technical people should please deal with that. My question was, and I was leading on from the speech from the president of Barbados, who said, of course, we must talk about Gaza. But she then said, there are other conflicts going on in the world that are not being mentioned, namely, in this case, Sudan. Indeed, many Africans have come out and say, you're not talking about Sudan. You are not talking about Congo. Here we have UN at 80. How has the UN represented Africa, especially given your experience, the conflicts going on in Africa, and what sort of focus, funding has it invested in the conflicts that are going on in Africa?
Well, if I got your question right, there are many conflicts going on the world, but some are clearly more popular than others, and especially Palestine, Gaza. We had the special session on Gaza where many countries recognized Palestine, an empty recognition, but politically and emotionally significant, while other conflicts, especially Sudan, which is very close to my heart personally, was grossly been neglected in terms of interventions to do something about it. And then there are other situations also happening around the world: Eastern Congo and Haiti and the Rohingya in Myanmar and such like. Now the problem is we blame the UN for this, but in the end, the UN is no more than the collective reflection of the voices that are represented. And some voices are louder than other voices, and that's true of life generally. So if, for example, some crises do not appear to have the same prominence, it's because people, which means nations, are kind of choosing what to focus on and what not to focus on. That's not the fault of the UN per se. That is really a reflection of the geopolitical interests of different countries in the world, which regionally, as well as in relation to particular issues. So I'm not sure we can say anything much on that, other than to say that has always been the case. If we think that everything in the world can be treated equally, because the UN is supposed to be an equal place where all countries, large and small, come and say and have their peace and want attention, then I think that is one of the greatest misnomers of the age. The UN is not an equal place. The UN is a place for strong countries, powerful countries, and for those who have the loudest voices. And the others are lucky if they can get their few minutes on the podium.
And then isn't that then the problem? Can you hear me now? My mic seems to be going strange as well, actually, I have to say. Can you hear me?
I heard you say something. I didn't get the question. What did you do? Isn't that the problem?
Yes, isn't that the problem? By that, what I mean is we have an issue where some conflicts, irrespective of how big they are, even though they affect thousands, if not millions, they don't get the look in, and it's that imbalance, that power imbalance. How do we understand? How do we negotiate with that? How can you unpack that for us? That power imbalance.
Well, I think it's always been the case. Okay, and ever since the founding of the UN, some voices have been stronger, and others have had to be dragged along. How do we redress this balance? If that's your question, then I think we are heading in the right direction, if it is some consolation to say that, simply because people are not accepting, countries are not accepting everything that's being done to them. Hence, you saw all those speeches going on in the assembly, where Barbados or other countries who were protesting about what's going on and who were not accepting the dominant narrative of the US and other powerful countries. And they were saying, okay, that's the reality, but we don't accept it. Now, so this is a reflection of a changing world order. Now, I don't know where the world order is leading and whether or not the world order is going to be better than the one that is fading. But we are in this moment of transition, and that I think is a good thing. But but let's not be naive about this. Just because there are more voices that are speaking up, little voices are getting more assertive, and countries are getting stronger, and the more powerful, richer Western countries are getting a run for their money, doesn't mean to say that the new order is necessarily going to be an equal or a fairer one. So I think this is an eternal struggle. As someone described the UN as a theater for the balance of power. I think it was the Finnish president in his excellent speech said that the UN is like a theater for balancing power. Now, if you visualize this UN like that as a place where you do combat about power and influence with words, preferably not weapons, then I think it is where you will see all these contradictions, where you will see visas being denied or not denied. You will see certain people being given more prominence or not more prominence. That's why I've argued, don't give the UN so much importance as we are doing. Everything doesn't have to happen in the UN. New York is not the center of the world.
New York is not the center of the world. Can somebody please cut that? I think the world needs to know. I think you might even have said that the last time you were here. But whilst New York is not the center of the world, of course, can you hear me? I really don't know what's going on today. Are you able to hear me, sir? Prof?
You cut off with long chunks of time, and then I get a few sweet words from you. So,
the gremlins are trying to get in between our conversation. I won't let them. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think
I'll repeat my question. Going on from what you said, indeed, New York is not the center of the world, but America has the power. We have to talk about this veto power. This veto power that, in my opinion, and I think many would agree, that has made the UN pretty much toothless, right? And of course, the UNSC, which is the UN Security Council, and those that are allowed on there, the big boys, as I call them, and the small brothers are not allowed. How then? So if that power resides, the power to veto resides in the hand of the United Nations, how else is the rest of us supposed to see New York, if not the center of the universe, at least the diplomatic universe?
Well, I think it is true that the way the Security Council works with veto for a few countries in it makes certain decision making difficult. But look around you. It hardly makes a real difference. So, for example, the countries impose sanctions on other countries and doesn't stop other countries from trading with them, whether we're talking about Russia or whether we're talking about Iran. So I think you'll find that the veto power is not as influential as it once used to be, because countries are simply going around making their own dispositions. They are making their own foreign policy decisions, building a multipolar world, and deciding what they will accept and what they will not accept. So, to be honest, the Security Council is toothless. Therefore, by definition, its veto power is useless, because countries who want to do something, they'll do it anyway. With or without, do you think China is going to wait for the Security Council to decide on what it can do or not do in relation to Taiwan, or whether or not it's wanting to carry on supporting Russia or such like? No, it'll just carry on. And so will other countries. Do you think India will stop buying Russian oil? No, it's not going to do that at all. And we're talking the big countries, but the same is true for the lesser countries. Countries are doing whatever they want to do. So, to be honest, I think this preoccupation with the Security Council reform and veto powers is a distraction. It's not going to make the world any better or worse if tomorrow there was a change in that. I mean, because the nature of power has dissipated, and we need to really talk about where decisions are made, how nations behave, and how geopolitics has shifted, and the multipolarity of the world that has emerged. That's why I say, I think the annual festival we call the General Assembly great, but it's an entertainment more than anything else. And the sun is still rising, the world is still moving on, it's still fighting. It's all the terrible things are happening, all the good things as well. So I think we should move on from making this the center of deciding how the world is going to be run.
Which then brings me on to, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I do want you, because the last time you were here, you were like, you've kind of stayed away from critiquing. Notice I said critiquing, not criticizing African governments. But I am inviting you to give us your opinion, your frank opinion about it. You talk about the fact that we're in a multipolar world, and literally vetoes can't do anything. Veto doesn't stop you as a country or as a collective from making a decision. Why then are African countries or African leaders or leaders of African country so weak on Sudan? Why are they so silent and so literally useless, if I may be so frank, on Sudan and what's going on in Sudan?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly I will not sit on the hedge on this one, or the fence on this one. I think one of the greatest disappointments of our current age is that Africa talks big and then does very little. And the standard of governance around Africa has really gone down, not just in the numbers of military coups we have enjoyed, but in terms of the standards of administration and public governance, in the exploitation of resources, and in the growth of inequalities. And the citizens are discontented in many, many countries around the world. And democracy itself, or the model of democracy being practiced in different countries in Africa, with elections every 4 or 5 years, and the winners having the opportunity to exploit the country before the next election round. So the legitimacy of African leaders has long since gone. And so I see, if you happen to be in Southern Africa or even in Nigeria, why do you care about what's happening in Little Darfur or in Sudan? Because it's far away, even though it's on your continent. So when you treat your own people so badly in your own countries around the continent, then don't be surprised if some bad things are happening to these people in another country called Sudan. There's no moral legitimacy to intervene. And the African Union, I mean, is it still alive? Is it still functioning? Last time I heard, the lights were still on, but that's about all.
Indeed, the light. Well, I watched an interview. It's a good question that you ask. I watched an interview, 90 minutes press parley between Burkina Faso press and Traore. And one of the questions that he was also asked is, this was by Burkina Faso journalists, why are we still in the African Union? Of what use is it to us? and he said something about how he didn't want to step out yet because he's giving respect to the person that's supposed to be the how do you call it? That's supposed to be the peacemaker between them. So it's a good question, but and the point you make is valid, but it doesn't help the people of Sudan. It doesn't help the fact that thousands, millions are displaced. They're hungry. It doesn't help the fact that you have foreign mercenaries. It doesn't help the fact that you have the likes of the UAE stealing their gold. It doesn't help what Rwanda is being permitted to do in Congo. So how can we help that? Because perhaps I'm even asking this from a personal point of view as a journalist who is constantly asked, Ireti, we need you to talk more about Sudan. Our leaders are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So what should Africans, journalists, civil society, intellectuals, and citizens, what should they be doing? How can we actually place that on the top of everybody's consciousness?
Yeah, I get your frustration. It's a frustration I share, and I think many decent people will share. I get it. I think don't underestimate the value of talking. What I do know from my experience within governments is that although they have impunity to act as they wish, invading another country or stealing its resources or supporting one side or the other in a civil conflict or exploiting a country for its political reasons or economic reasons, although we do that, countries don't like to be called out for it. Countries like to maintain some kind of figment of legitimacy, of morality around their conduct. So I think journalists do a great deed, investigators, human rights activists, and civil society do an immense service when they expose what is going on. They may not be able to stop it, but at least they're making sure that the wrongs that are going on are not going on in a hidden way, are not being buried. Now, don't underestimate the power of that. It doesn't mean there is an instant solution to the problems of Sudan, where the conflict is being fueled from outside in terms of weaponry and the exploitation of resources, as you mentioned, and also the vicious behavior of the two armed groups that are being encouraged by many forces. So it's not going to solve that in the short term. See, but compared to where we were decades ago, when these things happened in the darkness and the blackness, and most of us never even heard about it, except when history was written a century later, today those things are not happening. Now, as I say, these things are in a transition. The world is in transition. So it's no consolation to the people of, what I'm saying is no consolation to the people of Darfur who are suffering today. But I think putting it in the context of historical suffering and in the multiple layers of suffering that Sudanese have endured ever since they were independent, and other countries we can use as an example too. This is part of the historic process of change. So I'm in a strange position here because on one hand, I wish I could give you some easy panacea. I could say, do this, do that, and let's send in the peacekeepers, let's put embargoes on this, that, and the other, let's stop arming both sides, which we should certainly do, and et cetera, et cetera. But I know that we know what the right things to do are to bring the conflict in Sudan to a stop and to help the people there in terms of getting humanitarian aid in beyond the embargoes and blocks that have been placed by the armed goods. We know what the answers are, but it's almost boring to say it loud here because it's so easily, we all know it. But I know it's not going to happen. Therefore, for me to argue that we should do this, that, and the other is really offering a kind of false solution, because the solution will not be implemented by the African Union. It will not be supported by African governments, let alone the superpowers, let alone the UN. And therefore, the only thing I can come down to is to say, stick with it, that this is part of the process of change. And in order to build a better world, you have to endure the suffering. Now, that's an easy thing for me to say, sitting here in comfort in my home in Geneva. And it's a very hard thing to say for me, and I find it difficult to say. But the fact is, nothing better has come out. No change has happened without enduring a great deal of suffering. And I'm afraid, whether it's in Sudan or some other countries, there is still a huge volume of suffering yet to endure before we see the sun again.
Like you said earlier, you said Darfur means a great deal to you and it's close to your heart. And whoever doesn't know by now what you did whilst you were in Darfur, let me read out a quote of yours. You said, there is a debate about whether we had genocide in Darfur or not. But certainly in my mind, and the mind of many, many people, I think there is very little doubt that what went on in Darfur in 2003 and early 2004 was certainly genocide. We can argue the words, but that would be no consolation to those people who are affected. So, I subsequently went on to speak about it publicly, having tried the various diplomatic routes and avenues, and I soon found myself hauled onto a plane out of Khartoum. And as I reflected back on it, I thought to myself, there I was, presiding over the first genocide of the first 21st century. It is a place in history you don't wish to have. Here we are, what is it, almost 20 years on, and it's still the same thing.
And
Now,
the second genocide is taking place.
and the second genocide is taking place. And
The same actors of 20 years ago are acting in a genocidal way 20 years later.
yeah, I think it's worth us, or if you could help us, remind the people, the listeners, as you know, across the diaspora who are listening right now, what happened in Darfur and what made you actually pretty much tell the UN, get out there, you know, because that's pretty much what you did. You forced the world to respond. What was it that you were seeing?
Well, when I was appointed the head of the UN, at that time it was Africa's biggest country. It was still United Sudan. And I heard about some troubles going on in a region called Darfur, 1,000 miles to the west. I had to look on a map to find where Darfur was. And when I went there, I could immediately recognize a version of Rwanda taking place, because I had been in Rwanda before in 1994, and I had seen the mass killings there, which, as you all know, it was genocide. And what I saw in Darfur was that the nature of the violence was very selective. It wasn't everybody fighting everyone. It wasn't just atrocity and murder on a large scale. Darfur, by the way, is a region the size of France. So we're talking about a big area. But what I saw was very simple. It was that one bunch of people, which was mostly groups of Arab origin, were attacking people, Darfuris, of African origin. Now, to my eyes, they all look the same. I mean, I can't tell the difference between an Arab Darfuri and a Black African Darfuri, because they live together and they've intermarried for generations. They look the same to me. But the ethnicity, as you know, is a social construct. It's not because one ethnic person's blood is different from another ethnic person's blood. It is a self-identified identity. That's what makes it. So what was happening was that Arab groups from the Nile region and the Arab groups basically were exploiting the black settled populations of Darfur. And accompanying this was a rhetoric. The rhetoric was they were calling the black African populations, they were saying, we will give you Arab babies. as they did mass rapes. I think 1 in 3 women in Darfur were raped during my time. Those are my calculations at that time. And they were saying slaves, abid, derogatory terms for slaves. So we know that this campaign had a strong racist or dimension to it. And all genocide is ultimately based on racism. We call it ethnic and all that sort of stuff, but ultimately it's racist. So when I saw the pattern of destruction and saw that it was selective, it was targeting not every village in Darfur, only the black villages. You could go from one village and 5 minutes flying away on my UN plane, a village was perfectly all right. So I realized it was very much like Rwanda, where the Hutus had gone against the Tutsi. And the only difference between Rwanda, as I had seen in '94, and what I was seeing now in 2003, was the weaponry being used. In Rwanda, they were using their domestic weapons. Here in Darfur, I was seeing guns and bullets and Antonovs, and the only one side had basically aeroplanes, only one side had technicals, only one side has the artillery, which they were using, and that was the government side. The other side didn't have any, you see. So and
the government side being the North
Al-Bashir, what is now currently the SAF, the military government, is that side.
Yeah.
And we know from history, all history of genocide, genocides are always an act of state or controlling authority. If you look at all the genocides of history in Cambodia, in the Nazi Holocaust, in Srebrenica and Rwanda, it is the government authorities who generally initiate, because only they have the organization, the capacity, the command and control, the intelligence, and the means to do that, right? So, some are arguing that is happening in Gaza now. That's another debate. For me, it was very clear. It was genocide. And that's when I spoke up. And I was lucky in the sense that at that time, the Security Council was functioning. And I got a hearing. And that resulted in a referral to the International Criminal Court. And the first African Union UN peacekeepers arrived on the ground. They brought the killings to an end. The African Union, UN, it was a hybrid mission. And so you can say that the genocide was suspended. But because there was no justice and accountability, because the perpetrators were never brought to proper justice, even though they were indicted at the International Criminal Court, these guys survived, they prospered. And in the following 20 years, not only did they survive and prosper, they updated their technologies. So in my time, 20 years ago, they had crude aeroplanes from which they rolled petrol bombs at the back of Antonovs. Today's jets, today's drones, today's weaponry, especially imported weaponry, is far more sophisticated. And cyber warfare is being used and intelligence is being used to target civilians and harass them. But the pattern of violence we're seeing today in Darfur in the last couple of years is exactly the same. Ethnically targeted against Black African groups who are being raped, tortured, starved to death, and the same old obstruction to humanitarian aid that I saw 20 years ago. For me, this is it's such a deja vu. It's really a continuation of that history. And as you quoted me earlier, to go into history as having presided over the world's first genocide, and then to be sitting here 20 years later telling you that I failed completely and I'm still failing, and we're all still failing. It's you can't imagine what a bitter moment and how bad I feel about it.
Indeed. I mean, I think, like I said earlier, even as a journalist, because one of the things that the warring factions in Sudan have done is to cut off journalism, any form of reporting. We don't get it. I think it's only recently that an international journalist, who incidentally is Sudanese, was able to get in there and actually show us what was going on. Until then, we just get snippets and we don't see enough, which is where I often find myself explaining when they say to me, what is the difference between the genocide in Gaza and the genocide, going on in Darfur and in Congo? Now, I'd like you to kind of correct me if I'm wrong. I said that one of the big difference, like you said, is the world has not been able to get an insight, a live visual daily into what's going on in Sudan. Whereas in Gaza, what the Palestinians do is they make sure it's live streamed to the whole world, so you can't look away. Why is it that the Gazans or the Palestinians in Gaza are able to get, even though we know Israel cuts off their internet, but they're still able to get these things out? But in Sudan, in Congo, in the parts of Africa, we don't get, once the warring factions have actually cut off the internet, we don't get to see what's going on anymore. Is it time that Africa needs its own Al Jazeera?
Well, I think a number of issues there. Firstly, I don't want to compare the suffering of one group of people with another group of people. But let's remember that in the end, we're only talking about 2 million people in Gaza, okay? So this is not to say that 2 million people suffering is worth less than the 24 million people suffering in Sudan. I hasten to point that out, you see. But we have to understand that Palestine, Gaza, much more sophisticated and developed before the recent destruction started. And the journalists who are reporting from within Gaza are the remnants, they're the stringers and the local journalists of all the wire agencies from Al Jazeera to everyone else that were there before. These are not foreign journalists. These are all local journalists, and my God, they deserve a Nobel Prize for courage, if there was such a thing. Not for peace, but for courage to actually stay there and report. That's why we know everything that is going on. Now, in the case of situations like Eastern Congo and Darfur region, or other parts of Sudan, the logistics are much, much harder, and the inheritance is much weaker. There weren't that much media. I mean, I remember when I spoke up for the first time, it was to the BBC during my time as UN coordinator. I had to leave Khartoum and come to Nairobi to speak to the world's press, because there was no press much of in Khartoum, let alone in Darfur. So, and I think it's absolutely right. We need more people, more local journalists connected to international journalists, whether African or international, doesn't matter, but African is good, who are able to get the stories out. Now, today, we are able to do that in a way it was not possible 20 years ago, because we have the means of communication, we have satellite phones, we have internet connection mechanisms, which are much easier than they were in my case 20 years ago. So the fact that we are not getting such coverage so much is, I think, an indictment also for the media channels, because it's hard work for them. And there is a monetization issue. How are we going to pay for all these journalists and all the reporters and all the other logistical support that needs to happen? Look at one issue of insurance. When I know this from my experience, that when an international aid worker dies, when I was working in international organizations like in the UN or the International Red Cross, the insurance premium is the survivors get insurance, the injuries and benefits and all the rest of it. When a local staff member dies, the compensation is very, very little. There's a two-tier system here. So the locals are bearing all the risk and receiving the least compensation, literally, when they lose their lives. As we know, so many journalists and aid workers have lost their lives, and 90% of them are local people. So I think that's where we really need to draw attention and encourage these people of courage to go and do the job, which is to report and expose all these happenings into the light. not necessarily hoping that it will result in a solution immediately. But as I was saying earlier on, don't expect solutions. Your job is not to get solutions. Your job is to expose. It's like a doctor. Now, I'm a doctor by background. I don't necessarily expect my patient to live or die, but I expect them to receive and be given the best treatment I can for whatever condition they have. Then whether they live or die, it's in their own destiny. Similarly, in these situations, I don't know when we will have a solution to the problem in Sudan, and I can't make any fake promises to you for doing that. But I do know what our duty is in terms of keeping the people hopeful, keeping the people connected to the outside world so that their suffering does not go unwitnessed, and where possible to mitigate that suffering if we can through creative ways of bringing them humanitarian assistance using local organizations, and there are plenty of them in Sudan, amazingly. And so that way, I think we keep true to the faith and the values of the UN that we were talking earlier about, but which the UN is increasingly incapable of actually putting into practice. And just to make that important point, the important point is this. The UN is very precious for its values and ideals. But it doesn't follow that those values and ideals have to be implemented through the bureaucratic systems and agencies of the UN. And I worked in many UN agencies. That's not the real purpose, or that's not the real legacy of the UN. The UN, in many ways, is a legacy organization. It's an 80-year-old organization which is getting old and friable. And I think sooner or later it's going to crumble away in different parts, and that's no bad thing. So, but it's the values, it's what it stands for. That's what we pick up and run in our different ways wherever we happen to be.
Excellent. I still have a question or two for you, but they've already started calling. I'm opening up the lines 0201 277 0993 0201 465 7190. I'm coming to your calls now. Short, sharp, and succinct. Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, this will be here.
Good afternoon, Titi.
Actually, the first question is that, is he corroborating what Donald Trump said last week on the UN Assembly, that the UN is incapable of doing anything with what he has just said now?
Okay.
That's one. Number two, the pattern of conflict in Libya is following the same pattern in Sudan. We have the Khalifa Haftar faction that is having a cooperation with the RSF in Sudan.
Yeah.
Does it now mean that the same external influence that are driving the problem in Libya are the same people backing the same problem in Sudan?
Thank you.
What is your opinion?
Right. I believe you heard those two.
Well, I think, yeah.
The first one was, are you corroborating what Trump said last week about the UN? And the second one is it the same factions who are causing the problem in Libya who are behind the problems in Sudan? The lines are going.
Well, I think Trump is right to ask the question, what is the purpose of the UN? It's a question to which he should be the first to answer. But unfortunately, his answer is not necessarily the one that I would necessarily agree with, or you would necessarily agree with. Excuse me. However, the question is a good one. And, all those people who put the UN up as a god and say you cannot be questioned, that you are eternal, your values are eternal. I think they're doing us a disservice. So good to challenge the UN. Now, on the issue of Libya, etc., well, it's an interesting point. If you look at North Africa, we have a zone of conflict that goes from the Atlantic coast right up to the Red Sea, from the Atlantic coast up to Yemen. So, and this is the nature of violence and war. It's an infectious disease. When a pandemic happens, it starts in one place and then everyone is affected. So don't be surprised if all these conflicts merge and run into each other, and the conflicting actors feed off each other from one country to another country. That's why I do not think you're going to have peace in Libya or Sudan without having a kind of comprehensive approach that is going to address the interconnections of violence across the band of North Africa at the very least.
Okay, let me answer more calls. Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening to your guest. Sisioge, what I want just to say, just one thing. One thing I want to say is that every nation in this world, I don't know why, everybody wants to show how their muscle is. That is it. How their muscle is, how they are big, how they want to operate. That is just the problem of everything that's just going on.
Thank you. Right, he said it seems everybody wants to show their muscle. That might be the problem, the basis of all the problems we're seeing. Let me answer more calls. Hello.
Hello, Sisioge.
Yes.
Godman, yeah.
Godman, quickly, go ahead. One question.
You went to the Sudan the other time when the genocide was on. So I want to ask him. Now, he said about the Arabs. I want to know if, because some of the genocide going on is kind of has a religious undertone, in the sense that they like a jihadist kind of thing. So I wanted to tell us if there was anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
And if what's the solution for?
Okay, if there's a religious undertone to the genocide he saw in Darfur. Okay, thank you. Can I give you that question 1 second, Prof? You can answer it once I pick up this next call. Oh, unfortunately, I just lost it. Right. I'm going to give you 30 seconds, less than a minute, because they've started calling, like I said.
Yeah, in short, no. The original genocide in 2003 was racist, ethnic. And then it was Islamicized. So it was not religion that caused the genocide. It was that once the genocide started, as part of a tactic of fighting this vicious conflict, one side Islamicized it. And the same thing is happening now. It wasn't a religious conflict, isn't a religious conflict, and both sides are Muslim. And it's not, but the Islamic side, which is the SAF, the so-called government side, are using religion or Islamic fundamentalism as an instrument of the conflict.
Right.
So I think it's a secondary tool rather than a primary
cause. Right. Hello.
Good evening, CCOB.
Good evening. Very quickly, Manuel, one question.
First question. What is your opinion of the global flotilla that has been, the activists have been taken into custody? And what does it make Israel look, in the eyes of the international community? That is one. Number two.
Oh, no, Emmanuel, you've called late. Okay, quickly. Honestly, I don't have the time.
Can a country build a nuclear weapon secretly, without the world knowing?
Okay. Thank you. I think the second question is actually much bigger than the first. He asked about the flotilla. What are your opinion on the flotilla? I'll give you 10, 20 seconds to answer that. But more importantly is, can a country become a nuclear power without the world finding out?
On the flotilla, I think, my grandfather was a revolutionary in India, and he fought for Indian independence, and he went to jail for that.
Wow.
Okay, and it was an act of civil disobedience. You deliberately put yourself forward and to be put in jail as a mark of that. So what the flotilla are doing is, I don't think they were really trying to bring much humanitarian aid, but it was symbolic of disobedience against unjust happenings going on. Mm-hmm. So this is in the very traditional school of non-violent action, starting centuries, decades ago. Now, coming to the issue of nuclear thing, no, it's not possible for any country to arm itself in secret. Because we can detect these things with the technology. Having said that, the important point is this. I think it's not a fair world where some countries can have nuclear weapons and others can't. Therefore, to see that just because some countries managed to get nuclear weapons in 1940s and so on, and now they're trying to stop the rest of the world from getting nuclear weapons, it's untenable. Obviously, Iran is going to find nuclear weapons. India already managed to find weapons. North Korea, Pakistan. So I think either you have one set of rules on non-proliferation, anti-nuclear weapons for every country in the world, or you're going to be stuck with this. Why should one country have the nuclear weapon right to hold a nuclear weapon, another not? That's unacceptable. So I'm not in favor of the current nuclear regime that is currently in action.
Indeed. Right, my last question, because I don't have time to pick up any calls and I've only got 2 minutes left, is about the IEA chief Rafael Grossi, talking of nuclear, who has openly declared his ambition to succeed Antonio Guterres as the next UN General Secretary. Some diplomats have expressed concern that this reflects a trend of agency heads campaigning for the top post. What do you think? And would it be your choice? Even more importantly.
Well, I don't know who the other candidates are going to be. So if I had the vote, I would want to actually listen to them before deciding who to vote for, if I had a vote. Now, on the question of agency heads becoming UN, I think that's a good idea. I mean, do you think that politicians, very often failed politicians who made a mess in their own countries, are better qualified to make a global mess by becoming Secretary Generals of the UN? If you've headed a UN agency and you have learned about all the problems of running one agency, surely you're better qualified to run what is essentially a bigger UN bureaucracy, which is the main UN. So I'm okay with it. And as far as Grossi is concerned, well, he's done pretty well. We're not in nuclear war yet, despite all the problems of Ukraine.
The Iranians wouldn't agree with you.
Sorry?
The Iranians wouldn't agree with you.
Well, no, we're not in nuclear war.
Okay.
I mean, okay. Now, if the purpose of the Secretary General of the United Nations is primary mission is peace and security, then I think a person experienced in peace and security and diplomacy around peace and security and tough issues like that probably is a more important and better qualified candidate than someone just talking about development and humanitarian values and climate change and all the other problems the UN does. So I'm open-minded, but it's an interesting candidature. He's Argentinian, so why not, I would say.
Thank you very, very much, Professor. Again, you're going to be back because we love having you here. Thank you for sharing your very honest and frank thoughts with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, sir.
Thanks.
Number one. New Lafarge waterproof cement na confirm. One time. Put full stop. For what I
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.